Number, single dad, walked into the wrong hotel room. The CEO dragged him in and said, "This is my fiancé." Zane knocked on the door of Suite 1742, holding a keycard that shouldn't have worked, but did. The hotel staff had sent him to retrieve his phone, left behind when a confused bellhop delivered his luggage to the wrong floor. The door swung open before he could explain. Inside, a woman in a tailored black dress stood frozen, her hand still gripping the handle. Behind her, 3 figures sat in leather chairs, arranged like a tribunal. The woman's eyes locked onto Zane's for one sharp second. Then her fingers wrapped around his wrist, nails biting through his sleeve as she yanked him across the threshold. The door slammed. Matilda positioned Zane beside her like a human shield and spoke to the room in a voice that could cut glass. "This is my fiancé." Zane went completely still. He understood, in that terrible instant, that a single sentence had just thrown him into a war with no way back. 36 hours earlier, Zane Garrett had been a man whose entire universe fit inside one modest apartment and a 7-year-old smile. At 36 years old, he moved through life with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned to survive on less. He worked a night shift at a cargo warehouse near the airport, sorting packages in dim, fluorescent light while most of the city slept. The hours were brutal, but they allowed him to be present during the day when it mattered. When Bridget needed to be walked to school, when she had a scraped knee, when she asked questions like why do grown-ups lie to each other with those wide, trusting eyes that saw too much. Bridget was 7 years old and sharp as a tack. She had her mother's dark curls and a way of tilting her head when she was thinking that made Zane's chest ache. She was the reason he'd driven 3 hours to this hotel in the first place. Tomorrow morning he had an interview for a facilities management position at a medical complex. Steady work with better hours and benefits. The kind of job that might let him pick Bridget up from school instead of relying on neighbors. He'd packed his old portfolio in a worn canvas bag, documents and technical certifications from a life he'd left behind years ago. Skills he rarely mentioned anymore. Matilda Hart stood in that suite like someone who'd been carved from ice and expectation. At 34, she was the CEO of a real estate and hospitality empire that owned 17 properties across 4 states. Her posture was perfect, her voice controlled, her reputation built on never showing weakness. But beneath that armor, she was suffocating. The board meeting tomorrow would finalize a merger that would either secure her position or destroy it, and Constance, her stepmother, had made the terms brutally clear. Marry Dermot Vale, bring his family's votes into alignment, or watch the company slip through her fingers like sand. Dermot Vale sat in one of those chairs now, legs crossed, smile pleasant and utterly false. He was ambitious in the way that dangerous men often are, hiding calculation behind charm. He wanted Matilda's company, her legitimacy, her public image. The marriage would give him all 3. Once the contract was signed, he'd have her removed within 6 months. Everyone in that room knew it. Constance knew it and didn't care. Constance Hart occupied the power seat near the window, backlit and deliberate. She'd married Matilda's father late in his life, stayed quiet until he died, then moved like a chess master. As acting chairman, she controlled the board votes that mattered. She spoke about clean optics and family legacy while using Matilda's emotions against her like a weapon. To Constance, feelings were vulnerabilities to exploit. This engagement was a transaction, nothing more. Louisa Chen, Matilda's executive assistant, stood near the door with her tablet clutched against her ribs. She was practical, fast-thinking, and fiercely loyal. She knew the schedule, knew the players, knew which board members took money under the table. She also knew, watching her boss's hands shake as they reached for the pen, that Matilda was terrified. The hotel itself was one of Matilda's crown jewels, a 5-star fortress with VIP corridors secured by keycard access and cameras that tracked every movement. The merger announcement was scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. One scandal, one photograph, one whisper of impropriety, and Matilda would be finished. Constance had made sure of that. The trap was perfect, until Zane knocked on the wrong door. The mistake had been entirely preventable and completely innocent. Zane had checked into a standard room on the 9th floor earlier that evening. Bridget was asleep by 8, curled under cheap hotel blankets with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. He'd gone down to the lobby to ask about a missing charger and some paperwork that had somehow ended up in the wrong delivery. The front desk clerk, overwhelmed and working a double shift, had pulled up the wrong reservation in the system. The numbers matched, the last names were close enough. She'd handed Zane a keycard to suite 1742 and told him his belongings were waiting. Zane only wanted his phone back. It had photos of Bridget, his interview notes, the address of tomorrow's meeting. He'd knocked, expecting an empty room or maybe a confused housekeeper. Instead, the door had opened on Matilda's breaking point. Inside the suite, Constance had been tightening the noose. Papers spread across the coffee table, a pre-drafted engagement announcement ready for signatures. Dermot leaning forward with that practiced sympathy that made Matilda want to break something. "Sign now," they'd said. "Commit publicly. Prove you're serious about the family and the company." Matilda knew if she signed that paper, she'd lose everything that mattered. Her autonomy, her choices, the possibility of ever living a life that belonged to her. Then the knock came, and when Matilda opened that door, she saw him. A man in a plain jacket, holding a hotel keycard, exhaustion written in the lines around his eyes. A stranger who didn't belong to Constance's network, Dermot's schemes, or the board's machinations. Someone outside the system entirely. In that split second, Matilda made a decision that would either save her or ruin her. She grabbed his wrist and pulled. Zane had enough presence of mind to understand he'd walked into something dangerous. The way Matilda's fingers dug into his arm wasn't desperate. It was strategic. The way she positioned him, claimed him, staked her ground. All of it was calculated. But underneath the calculation, he felt something else. Terror, barely contained. Constance looked at Zane like a cat examining a bird that had flown through an open window. Dermot's smile thinned into something sharper. The room held its breath. Matilda needed chaos, needed disruption, needed something to blow apart the trap before it closed. If she could announce a different engagement, Dermot's contract became void. Constance couldn't force her hand, not in front of a witness. It was desperate and reckless and possibly brilliant. Zane opened his mouth to say, "I'm in the wrong room," but Matilda's grip tightened just enough to hurt. He looked at her face and understood. This wasn't a joke. This was survival. Constance recovered first, as she always did. She tilted her head and examined Zane from his scuffed work boots to his collar. "Who is this?" Her voice could have frozen water. Matilda didn't blink. "I told you. My fiancé." Dermot laughed, low and ugly. "You're joking." Matilda met his eyes. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Constance leaned back, fingers steepled. "Matilda, darling, I think we deserve an explanation." The endearment was a threat. Matilda kept her chin up. "Zane and I have been seeing each other privately. I didn't want the press involved until we were certain." Constance's eyes narrowed. "How convenient. And what does Mr.?" She paused, waiting. Zane swallowed. "Garrett. Zane Garrett." "What does Mr. Garrett do for a living?" Constance asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer would disqualify him. Zane could have lied, should have lied, but something stubborn in him refused. "I work warehouse night shifts, and I have a daughter." The silence that followed was vicious. Dermot actually laughed out loud. "A broke single dad?" "Matilda, this is pathetic even for you." He turned to Constance. "She's desperate. She's making this up as she goes." Matilda didn't flinch. She'd learned years ago never to show weakness in front of predators. Zane isn't part of your stockholder games, Constance. That's precisely why I chose him. You want stability? You want someone who won't betray me for shares? She gestured at Dermot. Unlike some people, Zane doesn't need my money to feel important. The words landed. Constance's expression shifted, calculating. Dermot's jaw tightened. Matilda had just reframed the narrative, turned Zane's ordinariness into virtue. Before anyone could respond, Louisa appeared at Matilda's elbow. "May I speak with you?" Her voice was urgent. Matilda excused herself and followed Louisa into the hallway. "What are you doing?" Louisa hissed. "Who is that man?" Matilda kept her voice low. "Someone who can't be bought. Someone Constance can't control." Louisa's eyes widened. "How far are you taking this?" Matilda looked through the doorway at Dermot's smug face. "As far as I have to, until I'm free of this engagement announcement." She pulled Zane into a side room moments later, closing the door behind them. "I need 2 weeks," she said without preamble. "Play the role of my fiancé through the merger announcement. That's all." Zane stared at her. "You're insane." "Probably," Matilda agreed. "But they'll destroy you if you walk away now. Constance will find out who you are, where you work, who your daughter is. She'll make sure you lose everything." Zane's hands clenched. "Don't threaten my kid." "I'm not threatening," Matilda said. "I'm warning you. This is the world I live in, and you're already in it whether you like it or not." She paused. "But if you help me, I'll help you. I'll cover your rent for 6 months. I'll get you a job referral that doesn't require night shifts. And I swear on anything you want, I will keep Bridget out of this." Zane looked at her for a long moment. He thought about tomorrow's interview, about the landlord's calls he'd been dodging, about Bridget asking why they moved so much. He thought about Constance's cold eyes and what a woman like that could do with a phone call and the right connections. "I have conditions," he said, finally. "Bridget doesn't become a prop. If this gets legal trouble, you handle it. And the second you break your word, I'm gone." Matilda nodded. "Agreed." They shook hands. The deal was made. The next 18 hours were a crash course in a life Zane had never wanted to understand. Louisa brought him a tailored suit that fit better than anything he'd owned in a decade. She drilled him on the basics. How to stand next to Matilda in photos. What to say if reporters caught them in the lobby. How to address board members without sounding intimidated. Matilda walked him through their fictional timeline. They'd met 6 months ago, she said. Kept it private. Planned to announce after the merger. Keep it vague, she instructed. Vague is harder to disprove. The hotel staff watched him like he was an exotic animal. Security guards exchanged looks when he passed. The front desk clerk who'd made the initial mistake looked terrified he'd be blamed for something. People Constance had planted throughout the building started taking photos with their phones, testing angles, waiting for him to slip up. Zane felt the weight of invisible eyes everywhere. Matilda tried to maintain her Ice Queen facade, but Zane saw cracks forming. Late that night, he found her standing alone on the balcony of her suite, phone in hand, not calling anyone. She looked small in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. She looked like someone who'd spent so long being strong that she'd forgotten how to be anything else. Zane didn't offer comfort. He just stood there, silent and steady. Sometimes that was enough. The ultimatum came at midnight. Constance sent a message through Louisa. Tomorrow, at 2 in the afternoon, Matilda would present her fiancé to the board. If Zane was real, the engagement to Dermot was void. If he was fake, Constance would go public with fraud allegations. Matilda would be removed for impaired judgment, and the company would pass to Dermot's family alliance. The stakes couldn't be clearer. Survive or surrender. The plan fell apart at 6 in the morning when Bridget's babysitter called, frantic and apologetic. Family emergency. She couldn't watch Bridget today. Zane stood in his room, phone pressed to his ear, mind racing through impossible options. He couldn't leave Bridget alone in their apartment. He couldn't miss the board presentation that would determine whether he'd be labeled a criminal. He couldn't risk bringing her into this building where cameras tracked every movement and Constance's people were hunting for weaknesses. Every choice led to disaster. Louisa found out first. One of the housekeeping staff had mentioned seeing a little girl on the 9th floor, sitting in the hallway near Zane's room, swinging her legs and humming to herself. Louisa came to Matilda's suite, pale and grim. "The daughter is here. 9th floor. If anyone sees her, if they connect her to Zane, if Dermot's people get photographs." "I know," Matilda said quietly. "I know what they'll do." She'd seen character assassinations before. They'd paint Zane as an opportunist using his child for sympathy. They'd paint Matilda as a homewrecker, a woman so desperate she'd destroy a family. The narrative would write itself, and the truth wouldn't matter. Matilda went to Zane's room herself, without security, without Louisa. Just her and the weight of knowing she'd dragged these people into her mess. She found Bridget sitting cross-legged on the bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, eyes wide and worried in a way that children shouldn't have to be. The TV was on but muted. Someone had left a coloring book open on the nightstand, crayons scattered like small, bright casualties. "Is my dad in trouble?" Bridget asked, before Matilda could even close the door. She had that direct, unflinching gaze that children sometimes have before the world teaches them to hide what they're thinking. No polite deflection, no small talk, just the question that mattered most. Matilda crouched down to eye level, her expensive suit wrinkling against her knees. "No, sweetheart. He's not in trouble." The lie felt wrong the moment it left her mouth. "Are you really going to marry him?" Bridget asked, tilting her head the way kids do when they're trying to solve a puzzle adults have made unnecessarily complicated. And Matilda, who'd lied to boardrooms full of men twice her age without breaking a sweat, who'd negotiated contracts worth millions with a straight face, found she couldn't lie to this 7-year-old. "It's complicated," she said, and immediately hated herself for it. Bridget nodded solemnly, far too wise. Grown-ups always say that when they don't want to tell the truth. She hugged her rabbit tighter. "My dad doesn't lie to me. He says lying makes people lonely." The simple statement hit Matilda like a physical blow. She thought about her entire life, built on performance and strategy, and realized Bridget was right. Lying had made her the loneliest person she knew. Zane appeared in the doorway then, and Matilda watched something shift in him. All the tension, all the careful guardedness he maintained around her, it melted away. He crossed the room and knelt beside Bridget, his hands gentle as he straightened her jacket collar, smoothed her hair with a tenderness that made Matilda's throat tight. "You okay, Bug?" he asked, his voice soft in a way Matilda had never heard before. Bridget nodded. "I'm okay, Dad. Are you?" It was such a small moment, that question, but it contained everything. This child taking care of her father even as he tried to protect her. Zane picked up the fallen rabbit from where it had slipped off the bed, brushed off imaginary dust, examined it with mock seriousness before handing it back like it was made of glass and hope and all the things worth saving in the world. "Mr. Hopsworth looks good," he said. Bridget giggled, just a little, and the sound was startlingly pure in the heavy air of that hotel room. Matilda realized, watching them, that she'd spent years in rooms full of powerful people and never once felt as truly seen as this 7-year-old made her feel with one honest question. Never felt as clearly called out for the walls she'd built. But honesty was a luxury they couldn't afford. One of Dermot's people spotted Bridget in the hallway. By noon, Dermot had a plan. Leak the story. CEO's fake fiancé has secret child. Or better yet, Hart CEO steals single father from struggling family. Either narrative would destroy Matilda's credibility. Paint her as reckless, immoral, unfit to lead. The press would eat it alive. Matilda made a decision. She called Louisa. Get them to the service elevator. No lobby cameras, no main corridors. Then she looked at Zane. I meant what I said. No one touches your daughter. Zane studied her face. You're risking your position for a kid you just met. No, Matilda said. I'm doing the right thing for once in my life. It was the first completely honest thing she'd said to him. Zane found himself believing her. Just a little. While Matilda prepared for war, Dermot was building his attack. He'd hired someone to dig into Zane's background, looking for anything exploitable. He'd bribed a hotel employee to access security footage, planning to edit timestamps and create a narrative of deception. He wanted proof that Zane was a con artist, that Matilda had fabricated the whole relationship. Constance was already suspicious. Her people had run a background check on Zane and found something interesting. Years ago, he'd worked in systems engineering, high-level technical work for a construction and development firm. Then, he'd vanished from that world entirely. Constance didn't trust disappearing acts. She didn't trust variables she couldn't control. Louisa noticed the intrusion first. Someone had accessed the hotel's internal camera system from an unauthorized terminal. She showed Zane the access logs, expecting him to be confused. Instead, he leaned in, eyes scanning the data with professional focus. This timestamp was altered, he said, pointing. And this one, someone's been scrubbing and splicing footage. Louisa stared at him. How do you know that? Zane hesitated. I used to work in this field. Matilda, overhearing, turned. What field exactly? Zane met her eyes. Doesn't matter. I left it behind. It matters now, Matilda said. The night before the board meeting, everything came apart in slow motion. Matilda received word just after midnight. If she failed tomorrow, the consequences wouldn't stop at losing her position. The board's lawyers had prepared a lawsuit claiming she'd deliberately damaged shareholder value through reckless personal conduct. They'd pursue her personal assets, her reputation, everything she'd built. She'd be bankrupted, discredited, erased from the industry she'd given her entire adult life to. They'd make her a cautionary tale, the CEO who let emotion destroy her judgment. She sat alone in her suite, staring at her phone with its hundreds of contacts, realizing she had exactly no one to call. No friends who weren't also on her payroll. No family who weren't actively working against her. Just employees who depended on her strength. Enemies who wanted her position, and people who saw her as a resource to be extracted. The loneliness of it was crushing, physical. A weight in her chest that made breathing difficult. Zane found her there, sitting in the dark by the window. City lights spread below like a constellation of other people's lives. He didn't ask permission, didn't knock, just walked in and sat down in the chair across from her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. I live for my daughter, he said finally, breaking the silence. Everything I do is for her. Every choice, every sacrifice, every time I swallow my pride and take a night shift I hate. It's all for Bridget. He looked at Matilda. I hate lying because it hurts kids. They see more than we think. They know when something's wrong, even if they can't name it. Matilda looked up, her carefully constructed mask cracking around the edges. I grew up in a house where every hug had conditions attached, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Every I love you came with expectations. My father loved the company more than he ever loved me, and when he died, he left me the thing he actually cared about, not because he trusted me with it, because it was all he had to give. She laughed, bitter and quiet. Constance didn't even pretend. She married him for access and stayed for control. At least she's honest about what she wants. They sat in that shared understanding, two people from completely different worlds who somehow spoke the same language of loneliness. Zane understood what it meant to be alone in a crowded room. Matilda understood what it meant to work yourself to exhaustion for something that might never love you back. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of things neither of them knew how to say. Then Matilda made her mistake. The walls went back up, defensive and sharp. "You're doing this for money, right?" she said, her tone reverting to the CEO voice, the one that reduced people to transactions. "That's all this is?" The words came out wrong, shaped by years of assuming everyone had a price, everyone wanted something, everyone would eventually try to take from her. Zane went very still. The look in his eyes wasn't anger. It was something worse. Disappointment. Deep and quiet. "I'm doing this so my daughter doesn't lose her home," he said, each word measured and deliberate. "So she doesn't have to change schools again. So she can keep her friends and her routine and feel safe. There's a difference between needing money to survive and wanting money to own things. I thought you understood that." He stood up, and Matilda wanted to grab his arm, wanted to take back the words, wanted to explain that she didn't mean it the way it sounded. But the damage was done. "After tomorrow, we're done," Zane said. "I'll play my part at the board meeting because I gave my word. But after that, you go back to your world and I go back to mine." He walked toward the door, then paused. "I was starting to think you actually saw people as people, not as tools or threats. I guess I was wrong." He left. The door closed with a soft click. Matilda sat in the dark and let herself cry for the first time in years. Not because she was losing her company, because she'd just hurt someone who'd tried to help her, and she didn't know how to fix it. Dermot struck at midnight. An anonymous email to every board member. Subject line, "Fraud Alert." The message included photographs, carefully edited to make it look like Zane had been paid cash in the lobby. Timestamps altered to suggest secret meetings, implications of prostitution, of corporate manipulation, of desperate schemes. By morning, the damage would be catastrophic. The emergency board meeting convened at 2 o'clock in a conference room designed to intimidate. Constance sat at the head of the table, Dermot to her right, looking sympathetic and concerned. Matilda entered with Louisa at her side. Zane was supposed to stay away. He'd packed his bag, written Matilda a note saying he couldn't do this anymore, planned to take Bridget and disappear before the press arrived. But Bridget overheard hotel staff talking in the hallway. She heard them say police, heard them say fraud, heard them say her dad might be arrested. She started crying, grabbed Zane's hand. "Did you do something wrong, Dad?" Zane knelt down, looked into her terrified eyes. "No, Bug, I didn't." "Then why are they being mean?" Bridget asked. Zane thought about running, thought about hiding. Then he thought about what Bridget would learn if he did. He picked up his bag, not the packed one, the old portfolio he'd brought for his interview. "Stay with Louisa," he told his daughter. "I'll be right back." The conference room went silent when Zane walked in. Constance's eyebrows rose. Dermot smirked. Matilda looked at him like she was seeing a ghost. Zane set his bag on the table. "I need to say something. Here's what Constance and Dermot didn't know. Zane Garrett had been a senior systems analyst for a regional development company 5 years ago. He'd worked on security infrastructure for hotels, commercial buildings, data management systems. He'd left after a construction site accident, a failure in safety protocols that had cost lives, including someone he loved. The company had paid him to stay quiet, to go away, to disappear. He'd taken the money for Bridget's sake and walked away from the career he'd built. But he'd never forgotten how the systems worked. Zane pulled out his laptop, an old machine he'd kept from his previous life. He connected it to the conference room display. "These photos you received," he said, pulling up Dermot's email. "They're fake. This timestamp says 9:47 p.m., but the lobby camera logs show the lighting was different at that time. Someone spliced afternoon footage with evening background." He clicked through screens. "This image of me receiving money is actually me getting change at the coffee shop. Watch the original security feed." Louisa stepped forward with a tablet. I pulled the backup logs before they could be deleted. 3 access points from an unauthorized terminal, all traced to this employee ID. She showed the screen. The ID belonged to someone on Dermot's payroll. The room erupted. Board members leaned forward. Constance's expression went cold and sharp. Dermot tried to interrupt. "This is ridiculous. He's obviously fabricated." "I haven't fabricated anything," Zane said calmly. "Unlike you, Dermot made his fatal error. He pushed back too hard, too fast, mentioning technical details only someone involved would know. The system wasn't even accessible from that terminal. The firewall was." He stopped, realized what he'd just admitted. Zane looked at him steadily. "How would you know what terminal was used unless you were the one who authorized the access?" The silence was devastating. Constance turned to Dermot with an expression that could have cut diamonds. Matilda stood. "I want to be clear about something," she said, addressing the board. "I did pull Zane into this situation. I used him as a shield against an engagement I didn't consent to." She turned to Constance. "An engagement you arranged as a business transaction without my input." She placed a folder on the table. "This is the original letter Constance sent to Dermot's family 6 months ago, offering company shares in exchange for a marriage alliance. That's a conflict of interest. That's using company assets for personal agenda." The board members began murmuring. This was leverage they understood. Corporate malfeasance, documentable and actionable. Zane added the final piece. "I've also compiled evidence of data tampering and employee bribery. The hotel will need to open an internal investigation, and depending on what they find, there could be legal consequences." He looked at Dermot. Dermot lost his composure completely. He stood up, face flushed, voice rising. "You think you can judge me? You're nobody. You're some broke nobody with a kid you can barely feed." The room went dead quiet. Even Constance looked disgusted. Dermot had just revealed exactly who he was. Not charming, not sympathetic, just cruel. "That child," Matilda said, voice like iron, "has more dignity in her little finger than you have in your entire body." The vote was swift. Dermot was removed from the merger negotiation. An investigation was opened into the data breach and bribery. Constance retained her board seat but lost her stranglehold on the votes. Matilda kept her CEO position, but she had to make concessions. Public acknowledgement of the pressure she'd been under. A commitment to corporate governance reform. Transparency measures. She agreed to all of it, because keeping her position didn't mean anything if she'd lost her soul to do it. Afterward, Zane packed his things for real. The deal was over. The crisis had passed. He'd done what he'd promised. Matilda found him in the hallway, carrying his worn duffel bag. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "I did it for my daughter, not for your world." It wasn't mean, it was just true. Matilda swallowed. "About the money. That was wrong," Zane finished. "It was wrong." Matilda nodded. "I used you. Then I pushed you away because I was scared of being used myself. That's not an excuse, it's just the truth." She looked at him directly. "You deserved better." Zane didn't smile, but something in his expression softened. "You did too," he said. Before either of them could say more, Bridget appeared with Louisa. She ran straight to Matilda. "Are you okay?" she asked. Matilda knelt down. "I am now, thanks to your dad." Bridget considered this. "If you don't lie anymore, can you come have dinner with us?" Matilda looked at Zane. He looked at his daughter, then back at Matilda. "One dinner," he said. "No cameras, no games, just people." "Just people," Matilda agreed. 3 weeks later, Matilda showed up at Zane's apartment building with takeout and no security detail. She wore jeans and a sweater. Her hair was down. She looked like a person, not a CEO. Bridget was thrilled, showing her drawings, chattering about school, treating her like a normal guest instead of someone important. They ate at a small table in a small kitchen, and Matilda realized she'd never felt this kind of peace in her entire life. After Bridget went to bed, Matilda and Zane sat in the quiet. "I don't need a fake fiancé to fight my battles anymore," Matilda said. "I'm restructuring the board, removing Constance's allies, building something clean." She paused. "But I would like to know the man who stood up in that conference room." "The real one." Zane was quiet for a long moment. "I'm a dad who made mistakes and walked away from a career because I couldn't live with what happened. I'm trying to do better. That's all." "That's enough," Matilda said. Zane looked at her. "I have one condition." "Name it." "Don't ever make Bridget ashamed of the adults in her life," he said. "Don't lie to her. Don't make her doubt what's real." Matilda held his gaze. "I promise." The rebuilding was slow. Matilda cleaned house, removed Constance's surveillance network, brought in independent board members. She offered Zane a position in building systems management, stable hours, good benefits, nothing he hadn't earned. He took it, not because she'd offered, but because it was the right fit. Bridget started sleeping through the night again, not waking up worried about whether her dad would still be there in the morning. Months later, Bridget drew a picture. 3 people standing together. No labels, no titles, just shapes and colors representing something that felt like home. She gave it to Matilda, who framed it and put it on her desk at the office. Not to prove anything to anyone. Just because it mattered. The story didn't end with a wedding or a grand gesture. It ended with a choice to keep showing up, to keep being honest. To build something real instead of something that just looked good in photographs. Matilda learned to sit down at a dinner table without armor. Zane learned to trust again, carefully and slowly. Bridget learned that sometimes adults mess up, but the good ones try to fix it. A door opened by mistake had become an exit for all 3 of them. Not from their problems, but towards something better, something true. And in a world that traded in appearances and power plays, that truth was the rarest thing of all.